My name is Sarah Chen, and I'm 28 years old. 3 days ago, I believed I was living the perfect life with the man I'd marry in 6 months. Today, I'm sitting in my empty apartment, staring at the engagement ring I threw across the room, wondering how someone can love you so completely while destroying you so thoroughly. It started with a phone call I wasn't supposed to answer. Marcus had left his phone on the kitchen counter while showering, something he never did. For 2 years, that device had been glued to his palm like an extension of his body. The buzzing was insistent, urgent, and the name flashing across the screen made my blood freeze. Emma, do not answer. I should have walked away. I should have pretended I never saw it. But curiosity is a dangerous thing, especially when it's mixed with the tiny seeds of doubt that had been growing in the back of my mind for months. The late nights at work that stretched longer each week. The business trips that seemed to multiply. The way he'd started password protecting everything, claiming it was for security reasons. My finger hovered over the screen for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. The shower was still running. Steam crept under the bathroom door like guilty secrets seeping into daylight. I swiped to answer, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I was sure it would burst. Marcus, thank God you answered. The voice was breathless, panicked, distinctly female. I'm bleeding. Something's wrong with the baby. I need you to come to the hospital right now. Please, I'm scared. The world tilted sideways. Baby. The word echoed in my head like a gunshot in an empty cathedral. I opened my mouth to speak, but no sound came out. My throat had closed completely, as if my body was rejecting the reality of what I'd just heard. Marcus? Are you there? Please say something. I can't do this alone. This is Sarah, I finally managed to whisper, my voice cracking like thin ice. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear her breathing, quick and shallow, and somewhere in the background, the unmistakable sounds of a hospital emergency room. Voices calling out medical terms. The beeping of machines. The squeak of wheels on linoleum floors. Oh my God, she whispered. You're the fiancé. The shower turned off. Marcus would emerge any second, and I'd have to face him with this knowledge burning in my chest like acid. But first, I needed to know. How far along are you? 6 months. Her voice was barely audible now. Look, I never meant for this to happen. I tried to tell him to choose, but he said he loved us both. He said he'd figure something out after your wedding. After our wedding. The wedding we'd been planning for 8 months. The wedding where I'd walk down the aisle in my grandmother's dress, thinking I was marrying my soulmate. The bathroom door opened, and Marcus stepped out with a towel wrapped around his waist, water droplets still clinging to his chest. He was humming something under his breath, completely oblivious to the fact that his entire world was about to collapse. When he saw me holding his phone, his face went through a series of expressions so quickly it was like watching a flipbook of emotions: confusion, recognition, fear, and finally, resignation. Sarah. His voice was steady, but I could see the panic in his eyes. I can explain. 6 months pregnant. I held up the phone, my hand trembling so violently I nearly dropped it. She's 6 months pregnant, Marcus. While we were picking out wedding invitations, you were making a baby with someone else. He ran his hands through his wet hair, a gesture I'd always found endearing but now seemed calculated, practiced. How many times had he done this same routine, this same apologetic stance, with her? It's not what you think. It's not what I think. I laughed, but it came out as more of a sob. She called you crying about bleeding and the baby. Your baby. What exactly am I supposed to think? Emma and I, it's complicated. We have history. But you have to understand, what we have is different. What I feel for you is real. Real? I stood up so quickly the chair toppled backward. You've been living a double life for 6 months. You've been planning our future while planning another future with her. Which part of that feels real to you? He stepped closer, and instinctively, I moved back. For the first time in 2 years, I was afraid of him. Not physically afraid, but afraid of what other lies might come out of his mouth. Afraid of how easily he might convince me that black was white, that betrayal was love, that I was the crazy one for being hurt. I never meant for it to go this far. Emma and I broke up right before I met you. Then she called me 3 months ago and told me she was pregnant. She said she'd been trying to reach me for weeks. 3 months ago. I was doing the math in my head, trying to make the timeline make sense. 3 months ago was when you started working late. When you started those weekend business trips. I was trying to figure out how to tell you. By getting more involved with her? My voice was rising, but I couldn't control it anymore. By continuing whatever relationship you had? By planning to marry me while she's carrying your child? The phone in my hand buzzed with another call from Emma. Marcus reached for it, but I pulled it away. Don't you dare, I said. She's bleeding and scared, and you're standing here making excuses to me instead of being there for her. Something in my tone must have gotten through to him because his shoulders sagged in defeat. For the first time since I'd answered that call, he looked genuinely remorseful instead of just caught. I love you, Sarah. I know that doesn't mean anything right now, but I do. Love doesn't do this, I whispered. I threw his phone at him and watched it bounce off his chest onto the floor. The screen cracked, spiderwebbing across Emma's contact photo, a pretty blonde woman I'd never seen before but who'd been sharing my fiancé for months. Marcus bent to pick it up, and when he straightened, I was already moving toward our bedroom, toward the closet where I kept my suitcase. Where are you going? He called after me. Away from you. My hands shook as I pulled clothes from hangers, not caring what I grabbed, just needing to pack, to move, to do something other than stand there and let his lies wash over me like poison rain. A red dress he'd bought me for my birthday. A sweater we'd picked out together on our first weekend trip. Everything in this closet held memories that now felt contaminated. You can't just leave. We need to talk about this. Talk? I whirled around to face him. He'd put on jeans but was still shirtless, still looking like the man I'd fallen asleep next to every night for 2 years. What is there to talk about? You're having a baby with another woman. She's in the hospital right now, possibly losing that baby, and you're here trying to convince me to stay. The baby might not even be mine. The casual cruelty of that statement hit me like a physical blow. I had to grip the dresser to keep from falling over. This was the man I'd planned to have children with. This was the man I'd imagined growing old with. Get out, I whispered. Sarah, please. Let me explain everything. Let me make this right. Get out. I screamed, hurling a shoe at him. It missed, hitting the wall behind his head, but he got the message. He left the room, and I heard him moving around the apartment, getting dressed, gathering his keys. The front door opened and closed, and then I was alone with the silence and the weight of everything that had just happened. I sank onto our bed, and for the first time since answering that phone call, I let myself cry. Not the angry tears that had been threatening during our confrontation, but deep, gut-wrenching sobs that seemed to come from somewhere beyond sadness. This was grief. This was mourning the death of the life I'd thought I was living. My phone rang. My sister Jessica, probably calling about some wedding detail. I'd been so excited to talk to her about flowers and music and all the tiny details that make a wedding perfect. Now I'd have to tell her there wouldn't be a wedding at all. "Hey, Jess," I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Sarah? You sound weird. Are you okay? Marcus is having a baby with someone else." The words came out so simply, so matter-of-factly, that for a moment I wondered if I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe this was all a nightmare and I'd wake up to find Marcus making coffee in the kitchen, humming that same tune, completely faithful and devoted. "What did you just say?" His ex-girlfriend called his phone. "She's 6 months pregnant and there were complications. She's at the hospital." I was surprised by how calm I sounded, as if I were reading someone else's tragedy from a newspaper. "Oh my God, Sarah. Where are you?" "I'm coming over. I'm packing. I can't stay here. Don't go anywhere until I get there. Promise me." I promised, but even as I said the words, I knew I couldn't keep them. This apartment held too much of him, of US, of the life I'd thought was real. Every corner reminded me of some moment of happiness that now felt like a lie. The kitchen where he'd proposed 6 months ago, getting down on one knee right next to the refrigerator because he couldn't wait for the fancy restaurant. The couch where we'd spent countless Sunday mornings reading different sections of the newspaper and sharing coffee. The bathroom where I'd just discovered that everything I believed about my life was fiction. I finished packing mechanically, my movements automatic. Underwear, socks, toiletries, enough clothes for a few days until I could figure out what came next. As I zipped the suitcase closed, my engagement ring caught the light from the bedside lamp, sending tiny rainbows across the wall. A princess-cut diamond that had belonged to his grandmother, passed down through 3 generations of women who'd presumably been faithful to their husbands. I worked it off my finger, surprised by how hard it was to remove. The ring had become part of me, a symbol of belonging, of being chosen. Now it felt like a shackle. I set it on the dresser next to a photo of us from last Christmas, both of us laughing at something his mother had said, looking perfectly happy and in love. Were we happy? Had any of it been real, or was I just the convenient girlfriend while he figured out his situation with Emma? I thought about all the times over the past 3 months when he'd seemed distracted, when his phone had buzzed and he'd quickly turned it face down. All the times I'd asked if everything was okay and he'd kissed my forehead and told me he was just stressed about work. The door buzzer rang, and I knew it was Jessica. My sister had a key, but she always buzzed first out of politeness. I heard her footsteps racing up the stairs, taking them 2 at a time the way she had when we were kids and one of us was hurt. "Sarah?" She knocked softly. "It's me." I opened the door and fell into her arms without a word. Jessica was 2 years older but had always been my protector, my advocate, my voice of reason. She held me while I cried again, stroking my hair the way our mother used to when we had nightmares. Tell me everything, she said finally. So I did. Every detail, from the phone call to Marcus's pathetic attempts at explanation to the way he'd casually suggested the baby might not even be his. Jessica listened without interrupting, her jaw getting tighter with each revelation. That bastard, she said when I finished. That absolute bastard. I keep thinking about all the signs I missed, I told Jessica as she made tea in Marcus's kitchen, using Marcus's mugs, moving around the space that had been ours but was now just his. 3 months ago, everything changed, but I convinced myself it was work stress. This isn't your fault, Jessica said firmly, handing me a steaming cup. You trusted the person you were supposed to trust most. That's not naive, that's love. But maybe I should have questioned more. Maybe I should have demanded to see his phone, or followed him on one of those business trips, or... Stop. Jessica sat down across from me at the kitchen table where Marcus and I had eaten breakfast every morning for 2 years. You're not a detective. You were his fiancée. You shouldn't have to investigate the person you're planning to marry. The rational part of my brain knew she was right, but the wounded part, the part that felt stupid and gullible, couldn't let go of the idea that I should have seen this coming. There had to have been signs. There always were in the movies, in the books, in the stories other women told about discovering their partner's infidelity. What am I going to tell Mom and Dad? They love him. Mom keeps talking about what a good husband he'll make, how lucky I am to have found someone so devoted. Jessica made a sound somewhere between a snort and a growl. Devoted. Right. Devoted enough to knock up his ex while planning your wedding. My phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at the screen and felt my stomach drop. Marcus, Emma lost the baby. I'm at the hospital with her. We need to talk when I get home. I showed the text to Jessica, who read it twice before looking up at me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. How do you feel about that? She asked carefully. It was a complicated question with a complicated answer. Relief that there wouldn't be a baby complicating everything. Guilt for feeling relieved about the loss of a child, even one that represented my fiancé's betrayal. Sadness for Emma, who'd wanted that baby and was now dealing with both a miscarriage and the knowledge that her secret was out. And underneath it all, a terrible certainty that Marcus would use this tragedy to minimize his betrayal, to make it seem like less of a big deal now that the evidence was gone. I feel like this doesn't change anything, I said finally. The baby existing or not existing doesn't change the fact that he's been lying to me for months. It doesn't change the fact that he was planning to marry me while maintaining a relationship with her. Good, Jessica said. Because I was worried you might let him convince you that this was all just a misunderstanding. I'm not that stupid. You're not stupid at all. But you love him, and love makes us want to forgive things that shouldn't be forgiven. She was right. Even now, part of me was already crafting explanations that would make this hurt less. Maybe he'd been trying to find a way to tell me. Maybe he'd been planning to end things with Emma after our wedding. Maybe he really did love me more and just got caught up in a complicated situation with his ex. But then I remembered the casual way he'd suggested the baby might not be his, as if that would make everything okay. I remembered how easily the lies had rolled off his tongue, how practiced his explanations had sounded. This wasn't a man who'd made one mistake. This was a man who'd been living a double life with impressive skill. My phone rang again. Marcus calling this time, not texting. I stared at his name on the screen, remembering how excited I used to get when he called, how his voice could make even the worst day better. Now the sight of his name made me feel sick. "Don't answer it," Jessica said. But I did answer, because I needed to hear what excuse he'd offer now, what spin he'd put on Emma's miscarriage to make himself look better. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. About everything. Emma lost the baby, and she's devastated, and I realize how selfish I've been trying to have both of you in my life." "Selfish," I repeated. "That's an interesting word choice. I know I handled this all wrong. I should have told you about Emma from the beginning. I should have been honest about the baby. But I was scared of losing you. So instead you decided to marry me while keeping your pregnant ex-girlfriend on the side? That was your solution to not losing me? I thought I could figure it out. I thought maybe after we were married, I could gradually distance myself from Emma and the situation would resolve itself." The audacity of it took my breath away. He'd planned to marry me under false pretenses, to start our life together with this massive deception as our foundation. He'd been willing to let me walk down the aisle believing I was the only woman in his life while secretly supporting another woman through her pregnancy with his child. And what about Emma? What was she supposed to think when you gradually distanced yourself after marrying me? She knew about you from the beginning. She knew I was engaged. So she was okay with being the other woman? It's complicated, Sarah. Emma and I have history. We were together for 3 years before I met you. When she called to tell me about the baby, she said she wasn't asking me to leave you, just to be part of the child's life. And you believed that? There was a long pause. In the background, I could hear the sounds of the hospital, the same sounds I'd heard when Emma called earlier. Beeping machines, muffled announcements over the intercom, the squeak of wheels on linoleum. "I wanted to believe it," he said finally. "I wanted to believe I could have both of you, that I could be a father to my child and a husband to you, and somehow make it all work. That's not how life works, Marcus. You can't have everything you want just because you want it. I know that now. Do you? Because it sounds like you only know it because the baby is gone. If Emma was still pregnant, would you still be trying to convince me that we could work through this?" Another pause, longer this time. "I don't know," he said quietly. "Maybe." At least he was being honest now, in his way. At least he wasn't pretending that losing the baby didn't make his choice easier. "I can't do this," I said. "I can't be with someone who thinks love means keeping your options open until circumstances force you to choose. Sarah, please. Come home. Let's talk about this in person." "I am home," I lied. "This is my home now." I hung up and immediately turned off my phone. The silence that followed felt both peaceful and terrifying. For 2 years, Marcus and I had been in constant contact throughout the day. Texts about grocery lists and dinner plans and funny things we'd seen online. Calls during lunch breaks just to hear each other's voices. Now that connection was severed, and I felt untethered, like a satellite spinning away from Earth. "You did the right thing," Jessica said. "Then why does it feel so wrong?" "Because you loved him. Because you thought you were building a life together. Because grief doesn't care whether someone deserves it or not." Jessica stayed with me until late that night, helping me figure out the logistics of unraveling a shared life. We called the wedding venue and learned that we'd lose our deposit but could cancel without additional penalties. We made a list of vendors to call, guests to notify, gifts to return. The practical aspects of ending an engagement were surprisingly complex, almost as if the universe wanted to make sure you really meant it before letting you off the hook. "Where will you go?" Jessica asked as she prepared to leave. "I don't know. Maybe I'll stay with Mom and Dad for a while, until I figure out what comes next." "What about work?" "I was a graphic designer at a marketing firm downtown, a job I loved but that suddenly seemed meaningless in the face of everything else falling apart. I'll work remotely for a few weeks. My boss is understanding about personal emergencies." After Jessica left, I sat in the living room of what had been our apartment, surrounded by reminders of our relationship. Photos on every surface showing us at various stages of happiness. His books mixed with mine on the shelves. His coffee cup still in the sink from this morning, before the phone call that changed everything. I thought about calling my parents, but it was late, and I couldn't face explaining the situation twice in one day. I thought about calling some friends, but most of them were couples who knew us as a unit. Sarah and Marcus, the pair who'd been together since college friends started getting married, who everyone expected to be next. Instead, I found myself going through photos on my phone, looking for clues I'd missed. Here we were at his company Christmas party 3 months ago, right around the time Emma would have told him about the pregnancy. Marcus's smile looked strained now that I was looking for it, and his arm around my waist seemed possessive rather than affectionate. Had Emma been calling him even then? Had he stepped away during the party to take her calls? Here we were on Valentine's Day, at the fancy restaurant where he'd surprised me with reservations. I remembered being touched that he'd planned something so romantic, but now I wondered if it was guilt driving the gesture. Had he seen Emma that week too? Had he bought her flowers as well, made her feel special while making me feel special? The photos became a timeline of deception, each smile now suspect, each loving gesture potentially tainted by lies. I woke up on the couch at dawn, my neck stiff and my eyes swollen from crying. For just a moment, I forgot where I was and why I was there. Then reality crashed back like a wave, and I remembered. The phone call. Emma. The baby. The lies. The ending of everything I thought I knew about my life. My phone had 17 missed calls from Marcus and 12 text messages. I read them in chronological order, watching him progress through the stages of crisis management. First came the apologies and explanations. Then the promises to make everything right. Then anger at my refusal to talk to him. Finally, desperate pleas for me to at least let him know I was safe. The last text was from an hour ago. "I love you. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I love you. Please don't throw away 2 years because of my mistake." Mistake. Singular. As if months of deception could be reduced to a single poor choice, a momentary lapse in judgment rather than a sustained campaign of lies. I made coffee using the machine Marcus had bought for my birthday, and sat at the kitchen table where we'd made so many plans. Our wedding timeline was still taped to the refrigerator, a month-by-month countdown to what should have been the happiest day of my life. Book the florist. Order the cake. Send save the dates. Final dress fitting. Rehearsal dinner. Honeymoon to Greece, the country we dreamed of visiting together. All of it was garbage now. Beautiful, expensive garbage that would have to be canceled and explained and apologized for. My phone rang. Jessica again. "How are you holding up?" "I'm okay," I said, though I wasn't sure that was true. I felt hollowed out, like someone had scooped away my insides and left only the shell. Mom called me this morning. She wanted to discuss flower arrangements for the reception. Oh God. I have to tell them. Do you want me to do it? I could drive over there this morning and explain the situation. The offer was tempting, but it felt cowardly. These were my parents, my life, my disaster. I needed to own it. No, I'll call them. But maybe you could be there when I do. For moral support. Of course. An hour later, I was sitting in my childhood bedroom at my parents' house, staring at the same walls I'd stared at through heartbreak over failed tests and unrequited crushes and friendship drama. My mother had redecorated since I moved out, but she kept some of my old things: participation ribbons from track meets, photos from high school graduation, a stuffed elephant I'd won at a carnival with my first boyfriend. That first boyfriend, Tommy Chen, had broken up with me senior year because he was moving across the country for college. I'd thought that was the worst heartbreak possible, the kind of pain that would define me forever. Now it seemed quaint, almost sweet in its simplicity. Tommy had been honest about his reasons. He'd cried when he told me. He'd meant it when he said he loved me but couldn't maintain a long-distance relationship. Marcus had looked me in the eye for months and told me I was the only woman he wanted, while secretly maintaining a relationship with someone else, while planning a future that included both of us without our knowledge or consent. My mother knocked softly on the bedroom door, the way she used to when I was sick and stayed home from school. "Sweetheart, Jessica told me you needed to talk to us about something." I opened the door to find both my parents standing in the hallway, their faces etched with concern. My father, usually so composed and logical, looked shaken. My mother, who prided herself on being prepared for anything, seemed lost. "Is it about the wedding?" Mom asked as we settled in the living room. "Because if you're having second thoughts, that's normal. Every bride gets nervous." "It's not nerves, Mom." I told them everything, watching their expressions change from confusion to shock to anger. My father's hands clenched into fists when I got to the part about Marcus suggesting the baby might not be his. My mother's face went through a series of transformations that reminded me of Marcus yesterday morning, except her emotions were genuine. "That son of a bitch," my father said quietly, which shocked me. Dad never swore, never raised his voice, never let his emotions get the better of his lawyer's composure. "David," Mom said automatically, but her heart wasn't in the reprimand. "No, Linda. That boy sat at our dinner table for 2 years talking about how much he loved our daughter, asking for our blessing to marry her, and all the while he was lying to her face about another woman. He's a son of a bitch, and I'm not apologizing for saying it." Mom reached over and squeezed my hand. "What do you need from us?" "I don't know. I can't think past today, past this morning. I keep feeling like I'm going to wake up and discover this was all a nightmare." "You can stay here as long as you need," Dad said. "This will always be your home." "What about the wedding?" Mom asked gently. "The vendors, the guests, the deposits?" "Jessica and I started making calls last night." "We'll figure it out." "I can help with that," Mom said. "I'll call everyone and explain that the wedding has been postponed due to personal circumstances. No one needs to know the details. People will ask questions. Let them ask. You don't owe anyone an explanation." My phone buzzed with another text from Marcus. This time it was a photo, a sonogram image, grainy and impossible to interpret. Below it, "This was going to be our baby. Emma wanted you to see what we lost." I stared at the image, trying to process the manipulation inherent in the message. "Our baby," he'd written, as if I'd been part of the equation all along. As if seeing the evidence of his betrayal in medical imaging form would somehow make me more sympathetic to his situation. I showed the text to my parents. "He's desperate," Dad said. "Desperate people do stupid things." "He's trying to make you feel guilty," Mom added. "About a situation he created, a baby he conceived while engaged to you. Don't let him." But I did feel guilty, despite knowing I shouldn't. I felt guilty about being relieved that Emma had miscarried. I felt guilty about not feeling sadder about the loss of a child, even one that represented my fiancé's infidelity. I felt guilty about throwing away 2 years of relationship over what Marcus clearly saw as a temporary complication that had now resolved itself. "You're not responsible for his choices," Jessica said. She'd been quiet during my conversation with our parents, but now she looked fierce. "You're not responsible for his lies, his betrayal, or the consequences of either. And you're definitely not responsible for fixing the mess he made." Over the next few days, I settled into a routine at my parents' house. Work in the morning from my childhood desk, lunch with Mom if she was home, long walks in the afternoon through the neighborhood where I'd grown up. It was simultaneously comforting and surreal, like stepping backward in time to before I'd met Marcus, before I'd thought I knew what my future looked like. Marcus continued to call and text, but I'd stopped reading his messages. Jessica had offered to block his number entirely, but something in me wanted to see the evidence of his desperation accumulating on my phone. Maybe it was petty, but watching his texts grow increasingly frantic felt like proof that his pain was real, that losing me actually mattered to him. On Thursday, 4 days after the phone call that changed everything, Emma contacted me directly. The message came through Instagram, from an account I didn't recognize but that was clearly hers based on the profile photo. The same pretty blonde woman whose picture had been cracked across Marcus's phone screen. "I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I wanted to apologize. I never meant for you to find out the way you did. Marcus told me about your wedding, and I knew it was wrong to continue seeing him, but I was scared and alone, and he was the father of my baby. I'm not trying to excuse what we did, but I wanted you to know that it wasn't casual for either of us. We both cared about you and hated hurting you." I read the message 3 times before showing it to Jessica, who was visiting for the evening. "She cared about me?" Jessica's voice dripped with sarcasm. "She cared about you so much that she fucked your fiancé for 3 months while you planned your wedding? She sounds genuinely sorry." "Of course she does. Her meal ticket is gone now that you've left him, and she lost the baby that was her connection to him. She's probably realizing that she threw away her relationship with Marcus for nothing. Do you think I should respond?" Jessica gave me a look that could have melted steel. "Absolutely not. She's not your friend, Sarah. She's not your sister or your confidant or your partner in this mess. She's the woman who helped your fiancé betray you. You owe her nothing, including forgiveness." But late that night, after my parents had gone to bed and Jessica had driven home, I found myself typing a response. "I don't forgive you, and I don't want to be your friend. But I'm sorry about your baby. No one deserves to go through that loss, regardless of the circumstances." I sent it before I could change my mind, then immediately regretted it. Jessica was right. Emma didn't deserve my sympathy or my kindness. She'd known exactly what she was doing when she continued seeing Marcus after learning about our engagement. But I couldn't shake the image of her in that hospital bed, scared and alone, bleeding and losing the baby she'd wanted. Whatever else she was also a woman who just experienced a devastating loss. Emma responded within minutes, "Thank you. That means more to me than you know." Then, a few seconds later, "He really does love you. I know that doesn't help now, but it's true. He talked about you constantly. I was always just the complication he was trying to figure out how to handle." Reading Emma's words about Marcus's love for me felt like being stabbed with a knife made of hope. Part of me wanted to believe her, wanted to think that his feelings for me had been real even if his actions had been unforgivable. But another part of me recognized the manipulation in her message, the way she was positioning herself as the other woman who never really had his heart, as if that made the betrayal less significant. I didn't respond to her second message, and she didn't send any more. Marcus, however, escalated his efforts. On Friday morning, I woke up to find him sitting on my parents' front porch, still wearing the clothes he'd had on the night before. He looked terrible, unshaven, hollow-eyed, like he hadn't slept in days. When he saw me through the living room window, he stood up and pressed his palm against the glass. "Please," he mouthed. "Just talk to me." My father appeared beside me, coffee mug in hand, taking in the situation with the calm assessment of someone who'd spent 30 years practicing law. "I can call the police," he said quietly. "Have him removed for trespassing." "No," I said. "I'll talk to him. But only for a few minutes." I stepped onto the porch, pulling the door closed behind me. Marcus looked at me like I was water and he was dying of thirst. "You look terrible," I said. "I feel terrible. I haven't slept since you left. I keep thinking about all the ways I could have handled this differently, all the moments when I should have been honest with you." "Like when?" "Like the day Emma first called. Like every day for the past 3 months when I chose to lie instead of trust you with the truth." He sat down heavily on the porch steps, and after a moment's hesitation, I sat down beside him, maintaining careful distance between us. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "Really, Marcus? Not the excuses you gave me on Sunday, but the real reason." He was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I'm a coward. Because I knew that if I told you about Emma and the baby, you'd make me choose between you and being a father. And I wasn't ready to choose. So you decided not to choose at all. I thought I could make it work somehow. I thought maybe after we were married, you'd be more understanding, more willing to accept that I had responsibilities to both of you." The casual assumption in that statement took my breath away. He'd planned to present me with his deception as a fait accompli after our wedding, when I'd be legally bound to him, when leaving would be even more complicated and expensive. "You were going to trap me," I said. "You were going to let me marry you under false pretenses and then tell me I had to accept your secret family because we were already legally committed." "It wasn't like that." "It was exactly like that." I stood up, suddenly unable to sit still. "You made a calculated decision to deceive me until it became harder for me to leave. That's not love, Marcus. That's manipulation. I love you, Sarah. Everything I did was because I couldn't bear to lose you. Everything you did guaranteed that you'd lose me. If you'd been honest from the beginning, we could have worked through it. We could have figured out how to handle Emma and the baby together. But instead, you chose lies. He looked up at me with tears in his eyes, and for a moment, I almost wavered. This was the man I'd fallen in love with, the man I'd planned to spend my life with. Seeing him broken and desperate made every instinct in my body want to comfort him, to find a way to make things right between us. But then I remembered the phone call, the casual way he'd suggested the baby might not be his, the months of elaborate deception. Love didn't do this to people. Love didn't require this much dishonesty to survive. I should go, he said finally. Yes, you should. He stood up slowly, like an old man despite being only 30 years old. At the bottom of the porch steps, he turned back to look at me one more time. If you change your mind, I won't. He nodded, as if he'd expected that answer, and walked to his car. I watched him drive away, feeling simultaneously relieved and heartbroken. Part of me wanted to run after him, to find some way to salvage what we'd had. But a larger part of me knew that what we'd had was built on lies, and you can't build a future on a foundation that was never real to begin with. The following week blurred together in a haze of phone calls to vendors, awkward conversations with friends, and the strange process of untangling a shared life. The hardest part was returning the gifts that had already arrived for our wedding. Each package I sent back felt like admitting failure, like broadcasting to the world that I'd been too stupid or naive to see what was happening right in front of me. My coworkers were kind but curious, accepting my explanation that the wedding was postponed due to personal circumstances while clearly dying to know more. I caught them whispering in the break room, speculating about what could have happened to the couple everyone thought was perfect for each other. On Wednesday, I went back to the apartment to collect more of my belongings. Marcus had texted to let me know he'd be at work, that I could come and go without having to see him. The thoughtfulness of the gesture only made everything hurt more. The apartment looked exactly the same but felt completely different, like a movie set after the cameras had stopped rolling. Our photos were still on the walls, but they seemed like props now, evidence of a performance rather than documentation of genuine happiness. I moved through the rooms systematically, taking what was mine and leaving what was his or ours. In the bedroom closet, I found the wedding dress I'd bought 3 months ago. It hung in its garment bag like a ghost of the future I'd planned, beautiful and white and completely useless now. I stared at it for a long time, remembering the day I'd tried it on for the first time, how perfectly it had fit, how radiant I'd felt imagining Marcus's face when he saw me walking down the aisle. I left the dress hanging there. I couldn't bear to take it with me, but I couldn't bring myself to throw it away either. In the kitchen, I found a list in Marcus's handwriting, things to discuss with Sarah. Below it, in his careful script, tell her about Emma. Plan conversation carefully. Maybe after dinner at Giuseppe's? The date at the top was from 2 weeks ago. So he had been planning to tell me. The evidence was right there in black ink, proof that some part of him had known he couldn't keep living the lie forever. But knowing he'd intended to confess didn't make the months of deception hurt less. If anything, it made it worse, because it meant he'd been conscious of his betrayal every single day, had been planning his confession while continuing to lie to my face. I crumpled up the list and threw it in the trash, then immediately retrieved it and smoothed it out. For some reason, I needed to keep it, needed tangible proof of his duplicity to look at whenever I started romanticizing our relationship or forgetting why I'd left. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "How are you holding up?" Found a list where he was planning to tell me about Emma. Dated 2 weeks ago. Bastard. He had 2 weeks to be honest with you and chose not to. She was right, but somehow seeing evidence that he'd been wrestling with his conscience made me feel marginally better about the time I'd wasted loving him. At least he'd felt guilty about the lies. At least some part of him had known what he was doing was wrong. I spent the next few weeks in a strange sort of limbo, living in my childhood bedroom but trying to figure out what came next. The immediate crisis was over, the wedding was cancelled, vendors notified, gifts returned, but I felt unmoored, like I'd been following a GPS that had suddenly lost signal and left me without direction. My boss had been understanding about my request to work remotely, but I knew I couldn't hide at my parents' house forever. I needed to find a new apartment, rebuild my social life, figure out how to be Sarah without Marcus after 2 years of being half of a couple. The hardest part was the quiet moments when I forgot, when I'd reach for my phone to text Marcus about something funny I'd seen or start planning what to make for dinner before remembering that I was only cooking for one now. Habits formed over 2 years don't disappear overnight, and my muscle memory kept reaching for a relationship that no longer existed. 3 weeks after the phone call that changed everything, Emma contacted me again. This time it was a phone call, her number showing up on my screen at 9 o'clock on a Thursday night. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won out. "I know you probably don't want to talk to me," she said without preamble. "But I wanted you to know that Marcus and I aren't together. We haven't been since I lost the baby." "Okay," I said, not sure why she was telling me this. "He's miserable, Sarah. I've never seen someone so completely destroyed. He talks about you constantly, about how he ruined the best thing that ever happened to him." "Emma, why are you calling me?" "Because I think you should know that he really did love you. What we had was complicated and messy and based on history, but what he felt for you was real. Is real." I sat down heavily on my childhood bed, surrounded by the stuffed animals and participation trophies of my past. "That doesn't change what he did." "I know. But maybe it should factor into what you do next." "Are you suggesting I should forgive him?" There was a long pause. "I'm suggesting that love like what you two had doesn't come around very often. Maybe it's worth fighting for. He's the one who should have fought for it. He should have fought for it 3 months ago when you told him about the baby. Instead, he chose to lie. He made a mistake. He made a choice. Every day for 3 months, he made the choice to lie to me. That's not a mistake, Emma. That's a pattern." After I hung up, I sat in the dark thinking about her words. Was love worth fighting for, even when it came wrapped in betrayal? Was forgiveness possible when trust had been so thoroughly shattered? I thought about my parents, who'd been married for 32 years and had weathered their share of difficulties. I thought about Jessica and her husband Tom, who'd survived his drinking problem and her affair 5 years ago and come out stronger on the other side. But those couples had worked through their problems together, with honesty and commitment to rebuilding what had been broken. Marcus hadn't given me that opportunity. He'd made unilateral decisions about our relationship and then expected me to accept the consequences without question. A month after leaving Marcus, I finally found an apartment. It was a 1-bedroom place downtown, close to work, with huge windows and hardwood floors and no memories attached to it. Moving day was both liberating and terrifying, the first concrete step toward building a life that was entirely my own. Jessica helped me move, along with my parents and a few friends who carefully avoided mentioning Marcus or asking how I was really doing. We focused on practical things: where to put the couch, how to arrange the kitchen, whether the bedroom needed blackout curtains. Normal, everyday concerns that felt almost miraculous after weeks of crisis management. That evening, after everyone had gone home, I sat in my new living room surrounded by boxes and tried to imagine what my future would look like. For 2 years, every plan I'd made had included Marcus. Now I had to learn how to dream in singular pronouns again. My phone rang. Marcus, calling for the first time in over a week. "I heard you moved out of your parents' house," he said when I answered. "How did you hear that?" "Jessica posted a photo on Instagram. You're in your new living room, surrounded by boxes." I'd forgotten that Marcus followed my sister on social media, that our breakup hadn't automatically severed all the connections between our previously intertwined lives. "What do you want, Marcus?" "I want to know if you're happy." The question caught me off guard. Was I happy? I wasn't sure I remembered what happiness felt like anymore. I was surviving, moving forward, building something new from the wreckage of what we'd had. But happy? "I'm okay," I said finally. "That's not the same thing." "No, it's not. But it's a start." "I miss you," he said quietly. "Every day." I know I don't have the right to tell you that, but I do. Missing me doesn't change anything. I know. But I wanted you to know anyway. There was something different in his voice, a quality I couldn't quite identify. He sounded older somehow, worn down in a way that went beyond simple sadness. "Are you okay?" I asked, surprising myself. "No," he said. "I don't think I'll ever be okay again. But I'm trying to figure out how to live with what I did, how to be the kind of person who deserves love instead of the kind who destroys it." "That's good," I said, and meant it. "You should figure that out. Emma told me she called you." "She did. I didn't ask her to. I want you to know that. She did it on her own." "I know. She thinks I should fight for you, try to win you back somehow. But I don't think that's fair to you. You've been through enough because of my choices." For some reason, hearing him say that made me want to cry. For weeks, I'd been bracing myself for grand gestures, for elaborate attempts to win me back. The fact that he was choosing to respect my decision, even when it clearly cost him, meant more than any bouquet of roses or romantic speech could have. "Thank you," I said. "For what?" "For not making this harder than it already is." Spring arrived early that year, and with it came a sense of possibility I hadn't felt in months. I'd settled into my new apartment, established routines that didn't include Marcus, reconnected with friends I'd neglected during our relationship. Slowly, carefully, I was rebuilding a life that felt authentically mine. I started taking a pottery class on Thursday evenings, something I'd always wanted to try but had never made time for when my schedule revolved around Marcus's preferences. The instructor was a patient woman in her 60s who talked about clay like it was a living thing, responsive to touch and intention and the energy you brought to it. "Pottery teaches you about imperfection," she said during one class as I struggled with a bowl that kept collapsing on itself. "The beauty is in the flaws, in the evidence of human hands shaping something from nothing." I thought about that a lot in the weeks that followed. My life felt like clay now, soft and malleable, waiting to be shaped into something new. The evidence of Marcus's hands was still there, visible in the cracks where our relationship had broken apart, but maybe those imperfections could become part of the beauty rather than something to hide or fix. 2 months after moving into my apartment, I went on my first date since Marcus. His name was David, a friend of Jessica's husband, and he was kind and funny and completely uncomplicated. We went to dinner at a small Italian restaurant, and he told me about his work as a veterinarian, his passion for hiking, his recent divorce that had been amicable and mature, and everything mine wasn't. "I'm probably not ready for this," I told him over dessert, surprising myself with my honesty. "That's okay," he said. "I'm not sure I am either. But we can be not ready together, see what happens." We kissed goodnight at my front door, a gentle, exploratory thing that felt like the first green shoots of possibility. I didn't invite him in, and he didn't press, and when I closed the door behind me, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: hope. The next morning, I woke up thinking about Marcus for the first time in days. Not with the sharp pain that had characterized my thoughts of him for so long, but with something softer, more like melancholy. I wondered if he was dating anyone, if he'd learned to be honest with whoever came next, if he thought about me as rarely as I now thought about him. My phone buzzed with a text from David: "Thank you for a lovely evening. Would you like to go hiking this weekend?" I looked at the message for a long time before responding. "Yes," I typed. "I'd like that very much." Later that day, I got a call from Emma. I almost didn't answer. We'd spoken only once since that night she called to advocate for Marcus, but something made me pick up. "I wanted to tell you something," she said without preamble. "Marcus is seeing a therapist. He has been for weeks. He's trying to figure out why he made the choices he made, how to be better." "That's good," I said, and meant it. He's also been volunteering at a crisis center, helping other people work through relationship problems. He says talking to people who are struggling helps him understand what he put you through. "Emma, why are you telling me this?" "Because I think you deserve to know that he's really trying to change, not just move on." 6 months after the phone call that ended my engagement, I ran into Marcus at the farmer's market downtown. I was buying flowers for my apartment, bright yellow sunflowers that reminded me of hope, when I heard someone say my name. I turned around, and there he was, looking healthier than he had in months, carrying a bag of vegetables and a coffee cup with a smile I didn't recognize. "Sarah," he said again, and I could hear the surprise in his voice. "You look good." "Thank you." "So do you." We stood there for a moment, two people who'd once planned to spend their lives together, now essentially strangers navigating the awkward terrain of unexpected encounter. "I heard you're doing well," he said finally. "Jessica mentioned you're taking art classes, dating someone new." I was surprised by how little his knowledge of my life bothered me. A few months ago, the thought of him keeping tabs on me through social media and mutual friends would have felt invasive. Now it just seemed like the natural curiosity of someone who'd once loved me. "I heard you're in therapy," I said. "That's really good, Marcus." "It is good. Hard, but good. I'm learning a lot about myself, about why I made the choices I made." He paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "I'm learning that love isn't about having everything you want. It's about choosing what matters most and being honest about that choice." "That's a good lesson. I should have learned it before I lost you." There was no self-pity in his voice, no attempt to manipulate me into feeling sorry for him. He was simply stating a fact, acknowledging a truth we both knew. "We both learned things we needed to learn," I said. "Maybe we couldn't have learned them together." He smiled then, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him since before Emma's phone call. "You're probably right. You always were the wise one in our relationship. I wasn't wise enough to see what was happening right in front of me." "That wasn't wisdom you lacked, Sarah. That was cynicism. And I'm glad you didn't have it. I'm glad you trusted me, even though I didn't deserve it." The conversation was surprisingly easy, surprisingly healing. This was the Marcus I'd fallen in love with, honest and thoughtful and genuinely sorry for his mistakes. But it was also a Marcus I'd never met before, someone who'd been forced to confront his own capacity for deception and work to become better. "I should go," I said finally. "David's picking me up in an hour." "The veterinarian Jessica told me about?" "Yes. I'm glad you found someone good. I'm glad you're becoming someone good." We hugged goodbye, a brief, platonic embrace that felt like closure. As I walked away, sunflowers in hand, I realized I wasn't sad anymore. I wasn't angry either. I was simply grateful for what we'd had, for what we'd learned, for the ways our ending had forced both of us to grow into better versions of ourselves. That evening, as David and I cooked dinner together in my kitchen, I found myself thinking about the pottery class metaphor. My life had been broken apart, but I'd used the pieces to create something new, something that was entirely my own. The cracks were still visible, but they'd become part of the pattern, part of the beauty. "You seem happy," David said, catching me smiling at nothing in particular. "I am happy," I realized, surprised by the truth of it. For the first time in months, I really am. Love hadn't looked the way I'd expected it to. It had been messier, more complicated, more painful than any fairy tale had prepared me for. But it had also been real, and it had taught me things about myself I couldn't have learned any other way. I thought I was loved, and I was. I also thought love meant never having to question it, never having to fight for it, never having to rebuild it from scratch when it broke. I was wrong about that part. But being wrong had led me here, to this kitchen, to this man, to this version of myself that was stronger and wiser and more whole than the woman who'd answered that phone call 6 months ago. Sometimes the truth sets you free, even when it breaks your heart first. Sometimes the ending you don't want becomes the beginning you need. Sometimes love means letting go of what you thought you wanted to make room for what you actually deserve. I was loved. I am loved. And finally, beautifully, completely, I love myself enough to know the difference.